Good morning, everybody. So I will add to the accolades that Miriam was getting earlier. So I've been in venture for 22 years. Miriam truly is one of the most amazing founders I've ever worked with. But the part that is also not quite obvious to people from the outside is that she's just an incredible human being who has, and don't blush, but has an amazing family, is super active in a really important nonprofit, and in her spare time runs half marathons all around the world. So there's going to be a lot to talk about. Let me sort of set the stage a little bit. You heard about the Miriam's history as a founder going back to the late 90s and starting Eve.com, which was around the time that I met Miriam. But we really started talking about this business in 2008. And so for your background, Ridge Ventures is an early stage firm. What we do is invest $3 to $5 million in the very, very early stages, Series A, of founder-led companies where we see working with the founder for the next 10 to 20 years. So we had an opportunity to meet Miriam. That was 2008. Fast forward almost 10 years. Minted is a big business. I think I can say this. Low hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, cash flow positive, still growing rapidly, just under 400 employees. So with this as the backdrop, I'm going to ask a few questions. Yep. So tell us about the genesis of Minted and the idea, and how did you come up with this?
Okay, well, first I want to say thank you for being a great investor and board member. Alex was the first person to basically take a chance on us when we had very little consumer traction. So whatever you saw was correct. And I think it's really important to find founder-friendly, encouraging board members and investors, and Ridge is one of them. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so how did we come up with this idea? I was starting to see, I'd been in e-commerce before. I'd been in e-commerce since 1998. But what was really interesting is to see a consumer change happening, which is that one, basically I was seeing bloggers come out of nowhere and emerge and actually grab attention from consumers who would rather read bloggers, talented independent writers, than editors at established institutions. And so that made me think that perhaps there was the same opportunity with product design, that there was hidden talent everywhere and the internet could help find that talent. And then second, the recession was causing consumers to think differently about what they wanted to buy and whether they really needed to buy from a known brand name versus an emerging artist. So a lot of these things changed. So that's when I started thinking, well, maybe I could run a design competition. Our first design competition was run when we launched the company in April 2008. It was unclear whether anybody would enter. Honestly, our sales were so poor in the first couple months of the business that I actually almost shut the company down and did not raise any institutional funding, and only really to save the original shareholders' interest decided to go talk to VCs about the idea. And that's when I found Alex. We completely pivoted towards crowdsourcing, and the business just took off the Christmas of 2008, and we were saved. But it's a long story. Almost ran out of cash many, many times, almost shut the company down. And as Alex says now, we're very large. So it's an interesting journey.
So you started talking about the crowdsourcing element and the contests. Tell us about sort of the first contest where you had professional established designers in the same competition with people who were complete amateurs staying at home, tinkering with design.
Yeah, this is something for a while, it was really shocking to me, honestly, because I thought, not being a designer myself, but enjoying and being aesthetic and enjoying aesthetic things, that first of all, designs spring from an artist's mind completely perfect, and that no artists really need feedback, A. B, that you had to kind of get some schooling and training to know what you were doing. So I had all these preconceived notions about art and design. And C, I thought, well, all the artists are in New York and LA. They congregate to these large cities, and all the talent that's where they are. And so first, basically we found that in the competitions, we didn't realize this, but there's this whole movement going on, and you guys are probably very familiar with this, where people were becoming creatives. They were doing some other day job, and then at night, 5 to 9, let's say, so they had a 9 to 5 job, and their 5 to 9 job was to basically teach them how to watercolor, how to do something creative, how to become a photographer. And there's this we're just really, frankly, at the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's happening, in terms of what is considered a creative right now. But that started happening. And so we had started first as this hybrid model where we had established stationary brands on Minted and then complete unknown people entering competitions. So we said to the brands, please enter these competitions to support the competition process. So I persuaded all these known stationary brands to enter the competitions alongside the emerging artists, very unwillingly. And then guess what happened? I guess you probably can figure out what happened, right? Which is the known designers, the known brands ranked at the bottom, and the completely emerging artists ranked at the top, and it was a
now,
shock.
who does that? Who does this ranking? Because this is kind of interesting,
So
right?
this is the platform is completely transparent. Everybody's invited to vote. So anybody can enter. There is no vetting, no elimination of talent, is how I would put it. And anybody can enter. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what your schooling is. You get to enter a competition, and then everybody's invited to vote. And then the votes are published, and that's what we sell, and the artists make a percentage. So it's pure, and what we're constantly trying to do is make it a meritocratic platform, because any sort of bias that is introduced anywhere in the decision-making process prevents you from understanding what is going to really sell. So the more layers you put in between the talent and the outcome, the more likely it is you're going to eliminate somebody or something that would sell really well. So our whole approach is really about how to find the truth, how to eliminate bias in decision-making. And we are constantly improving our algorithms to eliminate bias, our process. Strip out the artist names, faces, and locations before voting starts. Make sure that nobody can game the voting system, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all kinds of things you have to do to really make sure crowdsourcing works and you're getting the truth. But it's really a meritocratic system. We have at this point we have anywhere between 2,000 to 10,000 entries in every design competition. We have millions of votes are cast in every competition to tell us what to sell. Highly statistically sound and predictive. We use a predictive voter model to predict what's going to sell, which means if you come in and you've never voted before, but you look like someone, essentially with your characteristics of someone else who has successfully predicted before, your vote will be weighted more heavily. So it's analytics-based merchandising. It replaces the conventional notion of what a merchant is with analytics.
And how many designs have you actually now accumulated in your library that have had, millions of votes per design, effectively?
Yeah. Our archive, if I could draw it for you, looks like a hockey stick of our design archive. We have about 300,000 fabric patterns, typographic art, artwork, graphic designs that have won over the past 10 years. So I've been running the company for 10 and a half years. So it's about 300,000 pieces of work. And we're now starting a licensing and wholesale division to bring that to other retailers to provide design and art to them.
So can you give an example of something that you've done in terms of licensing these designs? Because I have a couple of Minted T-shirts that unfortunately I don't think is available for public
Right.
purchase yet.
Right.
But the designs are incredibly innovative and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So give us an example of some of the retailers who've licensed it and on what kind of products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for example, we supply most of the art to Pottery Barn Kids and West Elm. So all the wall art, a lot of the wall art that you see, almost all of the art in Pottery Barn Kids and Pottery Barn Teen is from Minted. Much of the wall art at West Elm is from Minted as well. In some cases we wholesale, in some cases we license. And then you might find our greeting cards at a large mass retailer, a very large mass retailer. If you go into that retailer, you will find our greeting cards. We've been given about 8 feet of space. And that just started happening over the past couple of weeks. They've been rolling out.
So we're selling product, we just can't talk about it yet.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So when you collect this much information from designers and from consumers who are voting on those designs, do you start seeing some emerging trends or patterns or shifts in popular taste?
Yes, we do. So what's fascinating, and I'm still trying to figure out what is going on, but it's kind of like a big humanities class. And I don't know how many people here took humanities, but it sort of maps, politics, philosophy, art, music, and for some strange reason, these things move together, and there's a zeitgeist out there. And these, strangely, I will just say very strangely, artists from all over the world are feeling a color at the same time. It's very strange. And I think social media has enhanced that because, of course, the communication now visually between people is instant, right? It's going global and instant. So we will see in every competition, let's say, for example, several years ago, we saw watercolor ombre start to come into the entries, and not only did it start coming up from the street, and I'm talking about everywhere, Cincinnati, LA, Hawaii, Kazakhstan, like everywhere. It comes up at the same time, and then all of a sudden the voters voted into the same location in terms of the ranking as well. So the consumer is speaking in unison, basically ranking trends for us in descending order in these ranks. And the designer is also thinking about ombre, let's say, or the color maroon or wine right now at the same time. So yeah, we see anything from like the hip animal of the year, maybe 6 to 12 months before retailers really know it. So we saw llamas start, like, let's say last February. The llama is very hot.
Does everybody know the llama is hot?
The llama is super hot. If you put a llama on it, it will sell. When we started the company, it was a fox, I think, and an owl. Now it's the llama. But yeah, whatever the hip animal is of the year, we're actually starting to think about making a stuffed animal out of the hip animal of the year and selling that because we know what the hot animal is.
So you refer to the trends emerging from around the world, and I know this is an international event. So give us a sense, how many countries you have designers in who are participating and producing product for you?
Yeah. So we are in all 50 states and I think at this point about 75 countries are participating. And the more we do open up businesses that are not based on stationery and words, the more they're based on art and fabric, the more international designers are entering because the language barrier is just simply less. So, for example, our best-selling children's artist is from Malaysia. And she works for Malaysian Airlines, and she had no distribution here, no nothing, and she ended up winning a stationery business competition. We suggested that we act as a bit of a talent agent, and we suggested that she enter into the children's art competitions, and now she's by far the #1 selling artist, and we've placed her art now. We're placing her art in other retail outlets, so she's going to have a massive U.S. distribution shortly.
So the interesting thing about Minted's business model is that you sell product primarily online, now increasingly offline. You license and sometimes you wholesale your designs in a variety of channels. But there is a lot of difficult activity that goes on in the background having to do with manufacturing. So tell us a little bit about the kinds of products that you manufacture, how you do that, and why it's tough and why you haven't had 10 competitors emerge in the last 5 years.
Well, one of the best things that ever happened to us, frankly, is that we launched in the recession, and we had no cash, and nobody wanted to fund any e-commerce companies, except for maybe Alex.
Yeah, we gave you some cash.
Alex was the only one. And so had a lot of foresight to do that.
Blind luck.
What we had to do was figure out how to engineer a model that would work from a cash flow perspective that would work from a cash flow perspective. So what we thought was, we'll crowdsource, put things on paper, and because the unit economics are great, and we won't carry any inventory because we don't have any cash for inventory, and we certainly can't hire any inventory planners, and we can't afford an inventory system, so we're not carrying any inventory. So it was like a totally cash-driven decision that has become like this liberating thing that a lot of retailers want now, which is, wait, how do you build this big business and not carry any inventory at all? Right, so it was only because of the economics of how we started that we ended up there. So the whole business had to be designed around having no cash. And I highly encourage that. I think it's a really good thing for people to try to do that with very little cash. So what we then did was we basically had to outsource manufacturing. I don't personally believe in owning manufacturing. Because I think it just limits you in terms of flexibility, and you start to make decisions based around the presses or whatever you own, the factory and the manufacturing you own, for us at least. The exception, of course, is if you're in an industry where it just simply does not exist and you have to start it. But if it's possible to find outside partners, do that. So we did that. We found we found a lot of outside partners, and we did lots of integration, technology integration work with them. And then we also developed processes and had to train all of these manufacturers on what we wanted to have them do. So we had to invent the process of the finishing and all of that, invent a process that tracked quality with certain metrics. So for example, how do you detect a press drift in terms of color? How do you detect at the peak when you're shipping God knows how many holiday card orders out? How do you control quality at peak on demand when you're making something on demand? It was I can only say that it was a very difficult thing. We also have customer service, so we scale customer service to the 500 customer service reps every fourth quarter, probably about, and we have to figure out how to operate that. So our company grows, doubles, triples in size starting October every year because we have such a huge holiday business. So all of that meant significant time spent on operations design in the beginning and then hiring to scale that.
So not for the faint of heart.
Yes, but builds a competitive moat. So you might not want to ship things, but if you do, it does create some, I've noticed it creates some moat.
So a lot of people know of Minted because of the holiday card business. I think the numbers you released, you reached roughly 70 million households or so. But in addition to the holiday cards, there's the wedding business, there is the art business. Kind of tell us what other products you have and how you think about launching new ones.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're in stationery, meaning wedding invitations, holiday cards. We have a huge weddings business now. Weddings is a very big part of our business. We're actually in digital products.
What does weddings include product-wise?
Weddings includes wedding websites, which we acquired a company in wedding websites. So we started acquisitions recently. So we acquired a wedding websites company and then put our content across the wedding websites company. Wedding websites, wedding day of, favors is now starting, wedding favors, wedding invitations is the core. The stationery is the core, and then we've been building all around weddings. But we've got weddings, holiday cards, baby and kids stationery. We moved into art about 5 years ago, wall art, framed limited edition fine art prints, and children's art. Then we moved into fabric, sourcing fabric pattern designs. Now we make home decor. So we take the fabric and we make it into items. And then we launched a test of apparel, T-shirts, in the fourth quarter of last year. The biggest questions are whether you have enough things underlying each of these businesses to make you basically make a return on capital invested. So essentially, return on assets, return on competitive advantage, return on capital. So if you have something like a community, that's the thread that threads everything together, is that we have a great community that can create content for all of these businesses. Then the question is the consumer the same so you can make more money on each customer acquired? Or do you have to go spend separate marketing budgets to go acquire in every single one of those businesses, right? So those are the two biggest questions. Then there's some operational leverage, which is do basically the operations of each of these businesses resemble each other enough that you can actually make the same people work or not? Otherwise, you're building all these expensive businesses, and you really have to ask yourself whether you have the capital and the ability to focus to make that successful. So what we've been tracking carefully is the transfer rate, of course, between these businesses is critical. So we know what the artist situation looks like, and they have been transferring, and the key question is, can you get the consumers to transfer? Or are you building separate businesses, separate brands, and how expensive is that? So that's how we think about it. We also think, can we do it operationally? Is there a competitive space? And one of the key things is, for example, we won't go into something where there's no design, where design does not drive like 90% of the decision, let's say. So why have we never gone into photo books? Photo books, most of the photo book is your photo, or your photos. It's not really about the design on it. So everybody keeps telling us to go into photo books, but the problem is there's very little place where we can have an artist add something to your product. So we will never, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for us to do that. So that's an example of, like, does this product match where you can deliver massive differentiation from your competitors or not?
So you mentioned artists, you mentioned design, you mentioned differentiation. So I think this begs maybe for a little anecdote. So I know there's a really one of the most popular designs that Minted has sold is a Starry Night or Firefly, a
Fireflies
Firefly
coming out of a
design.
jar.
So tell the story of how this design emerged, because it's not like somebody submitted and holy shit, then you sold $10 million worth of it. Sorry for the language.
Yeah, so this is my favorite thing about Mint. Minted has a great business story, economics, financials, but what I really love about Minted is the community, the artist community, and what happens and what I've discovered personally about artists and how they work together and how you can create a community. So what happens is, in the beginning, we had to basically say, we had no money, we had no sales, what were we going to offer artists? We had to offer them a fun game to play in the middle of the recession, and some feedback from other people is what I thought perhaps people might enjoy, because everybody loves to learn. I really do think people enjoy learning. A lot of people do, and so we tried to create this constructive community that would give you constructive criticism in a nice way, so not tear you down, because it's scary as an artist to put your work out there and then have people invite the entire world can critique your art. I mean, imagine how terrifying that is. For a second, like anybody can come leave any comment on this thing that is representing your heart and soul. So we said, please be nice, but please provide comments. So was the beginning of the cultural feeling in our community, and what happened as a result of that is that people began to help each other, and it became a little bit like co-opetition. I might help you in this game, but you help me in the next game. So I scratch your back this time, you scratch mine next time, is what started happening. And the design you're talking about ended up literally becoming a multi-million-dollar seller in wedding invitations. It's this picture of a mason jar with fireflies coming out of it. And it evolved because the community began to give advice to the woman who had designed it. Several rounds of advice. And if I could give you a visual here, I would love to. But it started in a pretty bad place. And it was very messy. And they asked her to make it simpler, simplify it, change it to... You could see this all happening stage by stage. It's all transparent. If you go into Minted's voting competition structure, you can literally see the designs changing step by step through community interaction. So that's the critical thing, is that people have learned to help each other, and then that's how her design was transformed into a bestseller. And by the way, in the process, the artist herself is changing. It's not just the design that's changing, it's the person who's changing. So within 18 months of going through this whole thing, she becomes a star. I mean, she's unrecognizable. Like, you have people coming in, and as a result of coming out of this community, they are literally unrecognizable. And I think this is a place where technology can actually be used for good purposes in terms of interaction and addiction, actually, where you could actually create addiction towards learning versus addiction towards maybe a bad use of time. And the other thing is just great design truly comes from everywhere. If you could see our stats, if I could reveal all of our statistics to you, you would see that there is actually a fair amount of bias out there that has to get continuously eradicated. Some of it is not bad intention bias, and I can go into that if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a couple of examples.
Yeah, so for example, I don't know if you guys have heard about the familiarity bias, but that is a type of heuristic or mental shortcut that we use as humans. Probably when we were cave people running around trying to make decisions, we had to make them quickly. There was a threat or somebody approaching, right? And so one of the things we do is we look for people who are familiar to us as a shortcut. So what we started sorting out in the community, for example, was saying, are people who are very embedded in the community and know everybody in the community more likely to vote with the familiarity bias than those who are not frequent participants in the community? So you can measure frequency by how many times do they vote, how many times do they visit the site. So you can index people on how embedded they are in the community, and then you can look at their votes and say, are they less likely to vote new people into the winner's circle? And indeed, they are much, much less likely to vote new people into the winner's circle if they are very embedded in the community. And that's an example of familiarity bias. So what you have to do is then you have to wipe out all the identities, right? in your voting process to make sure nobody can recognize anybody if it's possible. And you have to take the more embedded people and diminish their vote, right? Because the more embedded they are, the more biased they are. And the more they're going to vote the same people into the winner's circle. So let's just give you that's to give you like 1 out of 1,000 things that I could, we've been working on in terms of eradicating bias, but we measure bias all the time. And I can tell you for sure there is a lot of bias in decision making because unfortunately as humans we are really emotional and not actually as rational as we think.
So can we take some questions? No? One question? Okay, one question.
In wholesale, how do you think this will affect the business which started primarily online as e-commerce based? Do you think that will shift it away from its core capabilities? And what made it unique at the beginning?
It's a great question. So now that the business is going towards these wholesale and licensing deals, some of our deals might have to be non-branded in order to protect our brand because we may not want our brand in all places. So some might have to be just white label. And then the other thing is that we have to be very careful that those deals, when you dance with an elephant, the elephant can crush you, even if the elephant really loves you. And so we have to be really careful that we don't get swallowed up in activity, generating all these things for a partner versus taking care of our own direct-to-consumer business. It's a very thoughtful question because it's a real risk. So we have to be super careful.
So we're getting the fish hook. So thank you very much. Please give Miriam a big round of applause. Congrats on an awesome business.
Thanks.